I'm David Scandura,
And I'm Justus Burkett.
and today we're here to find out, is Rango the greatest movie ever made?
Now remember, son, stay in school, eat your veggies, burn everything but Shakespeare.
Sure.
Welcome to the greatest movie ever made, the show where we watch a movie and tell you if it is the greatest movie ever made.
Yeehaw!
A movie that is so thoroughly entertaining and compelling that while you're watching it, it's the only thing that matters in this whole darn tootin' world. I'm David Scandura. I am joined, as always, by my co-host and inbred bank-robbing mole, Justus Burkett. I'm back to the mean one.
Yeah, that's fine. In this case, that means I am either Harry Dean Stanton or I am part of Harry Dean Stanton's family. So that's fine with me because he's the mole grandpappy in this movie.
Yeah.
That's Harry Dean Stanton, who we've mentioned on the podcast before, and just one of my favorite. R.I.P. by the way, Harry Dean Stanton lived longer than he had any right to, considering the amount of alcohol and tobacco that man just constantly consumed. But still at 90 whatever. 92 or something, still gone too soon in my opinion.
Yeah, it's kind of kick-ass that he did this movie before he died.
Yeah,
Like
what
one
a
of
guy.
one of his last credits was Rango.
Anyway, so we're here to talk about a cartoon movie, an animated film, which we haven't done before. It's also a family film. It's rated PG. There's a little bit of we'll get into it, but there's a little bit of an edge to this movie. But it is still a family film, and as a result, David, I think that this is the first family-friendly episode of the greatest movie ever made. So no swearing allowed on this episode, except for damn and hell, which they say in the movie. We're good with damn and hell, but we can't say shit. We can't say fuck. We can't say asshole or dick or titties or anything like that. Cum. The Podmaster has also suggested.
Is this our first episode where we can't talk about cum?
We're not allowed to talk about cum because
the first
this is
cumless episode.
because this is a family-friendly podcast.
Yeah.
This is a family podcast.
This is a fucking family-friendly podcast.
So no more of that. We're shutting it down after this
Okay.
point. Actually, before we fully shut it down, I should say, in the last episode, I just wanted to correct a piece of misinformation. First of all, I mispronounced Lorena Bobbitt's name. I called her Lorraine Bobbitt. And I also said she cut off her husband's dick and balls. It was not his dick and balls. It was only his penis. So that's a correction from last week's episode. How you doing, David?
I'm good. Not a ton to report in my personal life. Just kind of chilling, enjoying this nice fall weather as we slide into winter ever so slightly here. I've been back to watching movies. I've started rewatching the Comedy Central show Review, which is one of the funniest fucking shows I've ever seen in my life, and not enough people know about it.
Yeah, I've never watched it.
It's about a reviewer who doesn't review books or movies or food. He reviews life experiences to the point of his own personal detriment and the destruction of his personal life and his marriage with his wife. It stars Andy Daly, and it is incredibly hilarious and one of the most clever shows I've ever seen in my life. Recommendation kind of from the end of October, from the end of spooky season, the movie Cobweb, which got a bit of buzz for a minute on the internet. It's on Hulu right now. And just a nice, fun little horror movie with a really, really interesting premise and interesting tone and atmosphere. Doesn't quite stick the landing for me personally, but I definitely think it was a good time. And would recommend that our listeners check it out. Also have been listening to the Caretakers album, Everywhere at the End of Time, which is a 6.5 hour ambient album.
Very accessible recommendation for our listeners.
Absolutely. It's broken into 6 parts, so you can listen to those individual parts. But recently I did my first full 6.5 hour listen of it with a few breaks. But listen to it in one go, basically. And really powerful and affecting and interesting album that is surprisingly emotional, given the type of music that it is. So I will shout that out. That's enough from me. Justus, how are you doing?
I am doing well, David. I was in 2 theater productions simultaneously this week. There was like a remount of a show with the Flagstaff Shakespeare Festival, and then I'm also in another show as well. So that has been like insane and taking up like way too much of my fucking time. But my freaking time, my flipping time. This is a family podcast. It's been taking way too much of my time, and but one of those shows just wrapped up last night. The Flag Shakes Romeo and Juliet remount. So I now only have one play to worry about, and then also my day job and this podcast, and that's all of my obligations currently. Which is delightful that these things are wrapping up slowly one by one. The other show will be over next weekend, and then I can kind of like breathe again and like get normal amounts of sleep and rededicate myself to actually trying in the gym and stuff, instead of just running from rehearsal to rehearsal. So that's nice. As far as media recommendations this week, I did just want to shout out, there is a Baltimore black metal / post rock project called Distend. It's a one-person project out of Baltimore, and they have just released a EP called 9, but it's like the Roman numeral 9, so it's IX. And just wanted to shout that out because it's cool, good, kind of dark, chilly music for fall. And additionally, any of the profits from that are being donated to humanitarian aid for the people of the Gaza Strip. So just wanted to call out that project. It's cool, it's good music, and stuff's going to a good cause from it. And they're kind of like an underground, like not very well known act that I really like the music that they've been putting out. So check out 9 by Distend.
Yeah, I think you've mentioned them to me before, so I'll have to give that a listen. Thanks
I submitted them in one of the music leagues that we're both part of.
That's what I thought.
Yeah, it was the one with the screamo vocals. But yeah, so that's my media rec for this week. Nothing else really to report. So we can go ahead and start diving into this week's family-friendly film, starring not at all controversial in any way figure Johnny Depp. And when I say not controversial in any way, I know, like, depending on who you ask, Johnny Depp is either good or bad. We're not going to get into any of that.
Yeah,
shit.
we don't care.
We don't care.
we're not giving more time to that trial that lasted forever.
I didn't watch a single gosh darn second of it, David. I didn't watch a moment of it because I don't care. That's not to say that, people who have like legitimate, actually very disturbing and bad allegations against them, like I care about that stuff. Just all the shit with him is so convoluted, and I'm like, I don't even understand what's going on anymore. So I'm just going to ignore it.
We're talking about Rango.
Yes.
Directed by Gore Verbinski from 2011, starring Johnny Depp.
Yes. Johnny Depp is Rango. It's on the poster.
Yes.
It's one of those posters, which I feel like you get more in animated films than in live action, where it's like actor's name is character.
Yeah, they're really trying to sell a lot of these animated films on the voice cast.
Yeah.
And I don't think anyone cares.
No.
I really don't think anyone in the world cares.
Yeah. This is kind of like a pretty well-trod talking point in the world of animation. But yeah, it is weird how much they're like, Hollywood A-listers have to be the voices of these characters that you're not actually seeing you're not seeing Brad Pitt, you're not seeing Johnny Depp, you're not seeing whoever, right? Brad Pitt's not in this movie, that was just a random example. You're not seeing Chris Pratt, right? There's no reason for him to be Mario, right?
Yeah.
Other than the studio thinks if they just put a famous person's name on the movie, more people will come and see it. And I think it's a pretty well-trod talking point on this topic that is like, I don't know if audiences actually care about that.
Yeah, I think Mario was probably the most recent one that was just like transparently like, we're just trying to fill this cast up with stars.
Right.
Because everyone was like, well, why don't you get the guy who's voiced Mario for 30 freaking years to voice him for this movie? And they're like, oh, we're gonna trot out Hollywood's golden boy, Chris Pratt.
Yes.
Universally beloved actor, Chris Pratt.
Yes, nobody has ever had a problem with him.
let's talk about some gore, and I don't mean
blood and guts.
People melting into soup.
Because this is a family film.
Let's talk about Gore Verbinski. This is I'm familiar with his pirates movies.
Yeah.
I think I've seen The Lone Ranger before. You know him from The Ring.
Yes. Yeah.
Mostly.
My favorite Gore Verbinski movie that I have seen is The Ring. I've also seen his Pirates of the Caribbean trilogy. Those movies I'm medium on. Like, I think the second and third one, I remember seeing the second and third ones in the theater and being bored during the third one in the theater. That's basically what I remember about those. And the second one, I kind of don't remember anything other than Bill Nighy as Davy Jones. Great performance and really cool CGI. That's basically what I remember.
Yeah.
Right? That first one I remember really, really liking, but I think when it came out, right at the prime age for that movie to really land for me. I haven't revisited it as an adult. And it would probably not hold up, I'm guessing, if I did. But, you know, I remember that first one kind of fondly, and then 2 and 3 are kind of whatever for me. But The Ring is, in my opinion, a phenomenal horror movie that deserves its reputation. I don't think it's like one of my all-time faves or anything, but it's a really, really good movie. Naomi Watts kills it in that movie. I think she's so good. And yeah, I think it's well-directed, well-made. The pacing is good. If you haven't seen The Ring before or don't know the story, there is like a pretty good twist in that movie that I'm not going to spoil. But yeah, it's a pretty cool little movie. And my very favorite thing that happens in that movie is Brian Cox hilariously commits suicide by taking a bath with approximately 30 televisions, which I think he has, we'll talk about this in greater depth in our inevitable episode on The Ring 2002, but he has like 30 TVs in a bathroom, and like he's got all of the cords like run to the bathtub, and he's in the bathtub that's full of water. And then I believe what he does is bites the electrical cord. I think he takes his Brian Cox chompers and just takes a big old bite out of that electrical cable, and just zaps himself to Kingdom Come, which rules.
That's a pretty badass way to kill yourself in a bathtub.
Yeah, two great suicides in that movie. One is Brian Cox chomping that electrical cable, and then the other one is the only horse suicide I have ever seen in a movie. In The Ring, a horse commits suicide by running off of a boat, which also rocks. So yeah, The Ring, good movie. My favorite thing that I've seen from Gore Verbinski, for sure. Including this movie. I like The Ring better than I like this movie, but The Ring is more my type of movie than this movie is.
He also directed the horror movie A Cure for Wellness, which I heard was really good, but I haven't seen it.
I haven't seen that either.
But this was my pick. This is your first time seeing Rango.
Correct. Well, I thought it was.
Okay.
And then I got about a quarter of the way into this movie, and I had a realization where I was like, I think I've seen Rango before. Because I was initially I was remembering stuff early in the movie, and I was like, oh, I probably saw trailers for this or whatever. And then the further the movie went, the more I was like, I'm remembering more about this movie than I should based on just having seen trailers. I think I saw this movie like when it came out and forgot that I had seen it. So it might be my second time with it. I'm not 100% sure. But regardless, it felt like I was watching it for the first time because I was remembering bits and pieces. Like I was remembering jokes or characters or like little sections. But I definitely didn't remember the full thing, like the full like overarching plot and like all of the there's a lot in this movie. Jokes wise, visuals wise, and I definitely didn't remember all of it. So it was even if I have seen this before, it was as if I was approaching it for the first time for sure.
Yeah, and I may have seen this in theaters. I honestly don't remember, but I had seen it a couple times before in my life, and then watched it again when we were putting our episode ideas list together. And I picked this a few months back. I ended up watching it just around that time, and So I was it played great for me. I was super excited to jump back into it. Literally like 2 months later. Um, so I'm excited to talk about it. We'll do a little bit more background on Gore Verbinski and the movie. We'll talk about Johnny Depp for a second, just because I want to get your take on him as an actor.
Yeah.
Um, Gore Verbinski's been developing this, was developing this since 2003, and then kind of put it on the shelf to go do the Pirates movies.
Yeah, which by the way, this is like, and I know you're getting into this with him, but like the fact that he made 3 movies that were insanely, like, some of the most successful movies ever made at the time, financially successful, right? Those 3 Pirates movies, the second one I think made over $1 billion and was like one of the first movies to make over $1 billion, I think, if I'm remembering this correctly. And to go from that to a cartoon movie about a cartoon western about a silly lizard that's just so crazy that he went from this like a massive Disney financial success and then made this movie. But continue.
Yeah, I think he decided to do this as a way to do like a smaller film after the huge undertaking that the Pirates movies were, but underestimated how much work this movie actually ended up being. They developed this for like 16 months with concept artists and storyboarding before they even sent it to the animation studio, which was ILM, who took care of this movie. They also shot a bunch of live action elements, not for partially for reference footage. They didn't do like performance capture, but they wanted to get the actors' facial reactions and build that into the animation. They also recorded the dialogue live during those sessions to get a better feel for the actors' chemistry and stuff like that, so it felt more natural.
Right, yeah, like the flow of the dialogue and stuff.
Yeah, everything flowed a lot better. So it's very funny seeing Johnny Depp dressed up in a cowboy hat doing these kind of these big gestures as Rango and stuff like that on the DVD. And like I said, ILM did the visual effects on this. They brought on Roger motherfucking Deakins.
Roger Daggum Deakins.
Oh, no. I said a bad word. Yeah, they brought in Roger Deakins. He's credited as cinematographer, but he really just like consulted with ILM as far as like how he would shoot this as if it were live action. Had a budget of $135 million. It earned $245 million, which was like a moderate success. It didn't really break even, but
right.
Paramount
definitely like a disappointment in terms of Gore Verbinski's previous films.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Like if you put it in the context of his filmography, this is a flop.
But Paramount was pleased with it enough that they decided to make their own animation department, and they made some of the recent SpongeBob movies and others that haven't really been as successful. But this won Best Animated Film at the Oscars and various other film awards around the world. I got a couple fun facts, and then we'll talk about Johnny Depp. James Ward Burkett, it's no relation. The last name's spelled differently. He's a collaborator with Gore Verbinski, storyboard artist, writer, directed a science fiction film called Coherence. He worked on this film. Graduated from Northern Arizona University School of Communications. And I remember that from freshman orientation.
Wow. That they were like this guy from the movie Rango.
Yeah.
Who worked on the movie Rango.
And I looked it up to just make sure.
Yeah.
Other fun fact, there's smoking in this movie.
Yeah.
Anti-smoking organizations campaign for this movie to be rated R. Which I kinda want to see R-rated Rango.
It would be so funny if this movie was exactly the same, like was the exact same movie, but was just rated R just because of the smoking. It's the Old West. It's the Wild West. You don't expect people to be chomping cigars, please.
Yeah. And of course this movie stars Johnny Depp.
Yeah.
Who, I mean, has numerous credits to his name. Pirates.
Yeah.
Nightmare on Elm Street.
Yeah. A legitimate movie star. Like a real A-lister Johnny Depp. Which I'm thinking about the other films that we've covered. Have we hit another real, like, A-list guy yet? Or is this our first real big,
I don't
like,
think
celeb?
so.
You know?
You know, Sylvester Stallone, but he kind of had his time.
Yeah,
I
and
feel
he's
like
sort of a niche celeb because he's an action guy,
Sure.
specifically, and that's a type of movie star, right? As opposed to just like this guy is just a guy that well, I guess you sell a movie on Stallone too, but they're different types of movie stars,
right. And I think Johnny Depp, up until very recently, with the kind of scandals of his personal life,
Yeah,
was still a big star.
Mm.
I think this kind of came out at a time where us collectively as a society were just starting to get a little tired of him.
Yeah.
And I kind of feel that in this movie a little bit.
Yeah. I think I might be picking up on what you're saying, and it's sort of how it sort of informs how I feel about his performance in this movie. My feelings on Johnny Depp in general. I think he is a good character actor. I think he's good at doing that. I think his specific thing does not always work for me. I think the Captain Jack Sparrow character in particular is just a little bit too much for me. You know, like he's doing a thing, he's committing to the performance, it's definitely a thought out thing, right? He's doing something and it is effective in communicating what he wants the character to be, right? I find it a little grating. And I feel similarly about some of his other performances. Like I've seen like Secret Window, which is not a good movie. And the Podmaster disagrees with me that that's not a good movie. You stole my book. But yeah, I don't really care for him in Secret Window. I think he's chewing a little bit too much scenery there for me. And some of the other stuff I've seen him in, I kind of feel a similar way about, where I'm just like, okay, he's a little too broad. He's a little too like a living cartoon for me. I love him in Edward Scissorhands. Like that is a place where he really, really worked for me. A lot of his earlier stuff, actually. Like I also like him in Sleepy Hollow a lot. He's great in that. Yeah, so his Tim Burton collabs, I guess. Although fuck that. Sorry. Forget that. Charlie and the Chocolate Factory remake.
Oh yeah,
that sucks.
Oh yeah. Well, he hits kind of lightning in a bottle with Jack Sparrow,
right?
And then just sort of rests on his laurels for a few years.
Yeah, but so what you were saying about how kind of society was maybe getting a little bit of Depp fatigue right around when Rango hit. I like Johnny Depp's performance in this movie quite a bit. And I think one of the things that works about it for me is that it almost feels like he's more restrained here as a literal cartoon than he was in those second and third Pirates movies, where he was essentially a live action cartoon.
Yeah.
Right? He feels more grounded as a cartoon chameleon than he did as a man in front of a camera, which that seems like a crazy thing to say, but I'm like, oh, I'm getting like more realism, and he just feels like a more three-dimensional character in this than he did in a lot of the stuff that he did immediately before this. And I like him in this. I think it's a really good voice performance. I think he does a great job.
Yeah. I guess we should just launch into the film then, because that's basically what we open with is Johnny Depp as a lizard.
Yes.
And it's the most Johnny Depp that a lizard has ever been.
Right.
There's this mariachi band that's played by a bunch of birds that kind of function as like a Greek chorus.
Yes.
Throughout the movie, just kind of narrating the events and
yes.
Foreshadowing and stuff.
And much like a Greek chorus, they are also portents of doom. I love that throughout the movie, in this family film, this group of mariachi owls are constantly singing about how the protagonist is definitely going to die. Which is very funny. My very first note here on the movie is mariachi music rocks. I love mariachi music. I don't actually like seek out and listen to mariachi music, but anytime it pops up, I'm like, mariachi music is so good, and I'm like, maybe I should do a deep dive on mariachi. Maybe I should get really into mariachi music. Anyway, so yes, it is Chameleon Johnny Depp. Initially, we're unclear on his location. He appears to be on some kind of tropical island.
It's in a fish tank. He's
Yes.
rehearsing a play with inanimate objects like a broken doll, fake palm tree.
Yes, he's rehearsing a play, as David said, and he is a schizophrenic actor is basically our setup for this lizard character, because he is speaking to hunks of plastic and giving them notes on their performance. Which, by the way, if you ever want me to be immediately annoyed at a character in a movie, make them an actor.
I was gonna ask how you felt about that element of his character.
It's just any movie that is like, this person is an actor, right? A capital A actor, where they are doing method shit and method stuff, and quoting Shakespeare or whatever. I am on staff for a Shakespeare festival. I find that so insufferable. Like, it's just a shortcut for me being like, this person needs to be taught a lesson, and he is taught a lesson in this movie.
Yeah,
so I appreciate that.
This movie is basically about Rango discovering his identity.
Yeah.
And in this acting section, he even has this kind of existential crisis where he is thinking about who he is, and then just launches into all of these different characters that he could be, because you see that, like, for him, acting is a substitute for having an actual personality.
Yes.
Because he's presumably lived in this fish tank for his whole life with all these inanimate objects.
Right. And it is sort of a clever choice as well to make him a chameleon, a lizard that is known for changing its appearance, right? And making that character, like, not only an actor, but an actor with an identity crisis, right? It all ties up very neatly as like little character package, that his externalized version of his internal life is that he also can, like, change color and stuff. Which, by the way, just very brief thing on that, we only see him change color once in this movie.
Yeah.
I kind of wish they had used that more.
Yeah, he kind of just, like, remembers that he's a chameleon, then forgets about it.
Yeah, the movie remembers he's a chameleon and is like, oh yeah, they changed color one time, and then he just never does it again. Which I thought was a shame. I think there could have been gags that they could have done with that.
Yeah, probably. In this monologue where he's talking about the nature of a hero and all these different characters that he could be, he says, we need an unexpected, ironic turn of events that will propel our hero into conflict. And on cue, we reveal that he's in a fish tank in the back of a car that's driving across country. There's a family in the front, and they swerve, and in this slow motion sequence, his fish tank flies out of the back of the car and shatters into a million pieces.
Yeah.
And he's in the middle of the highway in the Mojave Desert.
Yes. And here we have him meet the character Roadkill, who is voiced by Alfred Molina, which I just wanted to put on your radar, David. We have covered another Alfred Molina performance in Lady Hawk. Our film for next week, which I won't spoil because we save that for the end of the episode. But the film we're going to be covering next week also has an Alfred Molina performance, which means in our first 12 episodes, 25% of them will contain Alfred Molina.
And they're all surprise Alfred Molina performances, because Alfred Molina, when he's not dressed up as a scientist with octopus mechanical arms, just appears in movies. It's suddenly Molina.
Yes, and I think the movie that we're covering next week is the biggest example of that, where that one is like a true Molina jump scare.
Absolutely.
Like, he just shows up in that movie and you're like, oh god, Alfred Molina. But yeah, so he meets Roadkill here, who is an armadillo who has been run over, voiced by Alfred Molina. And this armadillo, like, immediately starts kind of saying some vague esoteric stuff about the West and the spirit of the West, and how you need to get to the other side to essentially, like, reach enlightenment, right?
Yes. The spirit of the West, who rides in an alabaster carriage with golden guardians.
Yes.
And
it is very funny here because Roadkill is an armadillo who's been run over, like I said, and he's got an enormous just tire imprint like through his whole stomach. And again, for a family film, like I was talking about how this movie has a little bit of an edge to it, this is a little disturbing because he's like fully flattened in the middle, and it looks sort of gross. Which I like that it's like, oh, this is like a movie for kids, but also this character has been like fully run over by a car and looks kind of like messed up.
Yeah, and he's fine. He gets up and he's fine.
Chilling. Yeah.
But he should be dead, basically.
Yeah. And maybe he is. Maybe he's a ghost or an angel.
Maybe he is. He's kind of a spiritual figure in this movie.
Yeah, so he might be dead. Maybe Johnny Depp Lizard was just talking to an actual corpse.
A gust of wind from a passing truck blows Rango into traffic, and he bumps around with various cars and all of these fun visual gags.
Yeah. Really fun, like kind of wild Looney Tunes type sequence here where it's just gag after gag after gag.
Yeah, and this kind of stuff happens a lot throughout this movie. Just very visual, a lot of visual gags. They're very creative and have a lot of detail and thought put into them. He lands on a Fear and Loathing reference.
Yes.
He literally lands on the windshield of the car from Fear and Loathing, and we see Dr. Gonzo and Raoul Duke, these big caricatures of them. And so this movie is taking place canonically at the same time as Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas.
But also, I wanted to mention this. Rango's, because obviously Johnny Depp starred in Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas.
Right.
And I wanted to say Rango's character design is also, I believe, a Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas reference. Because the poster for Fear and Loathing is Johnny Depp's kind of distorted big head with a crooked kind of lightning bolt neck. And that's what Rango looks like. He has like the big oversized head with the disproportionate eyes. And then the lightning bolt little neck. And I'm pretty sure he's modeled after the poster for Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas.
And I think he's also wearing a similar shirt.
Yeah.
Too. He has a like a floral kind of red Hawaiian shirt on at this part of the film.
Yeah.
That I think Johnny Depp also wears in Fear and Loathing.
Right.
He lands in the highway, and Roadkill comes across him again and says, "The path to knowledge is fraught with consequence," and starts saying more esoteric things.
Yes.
To find water, you must find dirt, for tomorrow the water comes. And Rango just takes off into the desert.
Yeah, Roadkill's basically like, you have to walk that way. And he's like, that way, there's no road. It's just empty desert. And he's like, do it. And he does. And the Mariachi Owls here sing another little song about how he's inevitably going to die. They have one line that I wanted to call out because I thought it was very funny in this little musical interlude where they say they're going to watch him lose his cojones. Lots of genital jokes in this movie.
Not even just genital jokes. Tons of unhinged dialogue in this movie that is great.
Yes. Yeah, it is. It does go very like weird with the comedy. Like it goes very kind of like out of left field with a lot of the stuff in this in a way that a lot of family films don't. Which I appreciated. But yeah, so he's then walking across the empty Mojave Desert. I did want to point out, this is an Arizona-based podcast. There are saguaros in this scene. He's walking past a bunch of saguaro cacti. Saguaros are not in the Mojave Desert. They are in the Sonoran Desert. So this is factually inaccurate, but we can move past that. I will allow that from this film directed by Gore Verbinski, who presumably has never been to the Sonoran Desert or doesn't know the difference, I guess.
Between the two of us, you are the cactus expert because I have a cactus that is currently dying. So I'll allow you your little soapbox there.
Yes. So just saying, they're indigenous to the Sonoran Desert. They don't grow in the Mojave.
He comes across a desert rain frog named Rockeye. There's a lot of characters in this movie that their names aren't said aloud, but they're given names in credits and stuff like that.
And this frog's name doesn't matter because he dies in 2 minutes.
Yeah. He's blending into the ground, and he tells Rango to blend in. There's this hawk circling overhead that eventually notices that they're down there.
Mhm.
And
Yeah, when Rango's trying to blend in, it is pretty funny because he's chameleons are like a tropical lizard, right? They're not like a desert lizard. So he's turning like very bright, vibrant colors like you would to blend in a rainforest. And also he's wearing this really loud red shirt, right? So it's just very funny because when he's trying to blend in, it's like not working.
yeah, the hawk dives down and chases them and gets his head stuck in a tin can. Rango hides in this glass bottle, and a really kind of effectively intense moment where the hawk digs its claws into the bottle and then grabs the bottle
Yeah.
with Rango inside and starts soaring up and then drops it down.
Yeah.
The villain, how do I want to say this? There's been a lot of discussion recently about animated films like and kid films from the perspective of like people I would describe as man children
Mm-hmm.
who are like, this is actually a horror movie, and it's like the wolf villain from the newest Puss in Boots movie
Yeah.
and stuff.
Yes, people who have never watched a horror movie and don't understand what that means.
Right. I think the villain designs in this movie, starting with this hawk, are all actually really good and kind of effective at being intimidating.
Yeah, I think the snake one especially, which we'll get to.
Yeah.
But I think Jake the rattlesnake is definitely the scariest, and his character design is I think on the upper end of what you can get away with as far as frightening character design in a family film.
Yeah.
Right? If he was any scarier, like kids would be crying and running out of the theater.
and this hawk too.
Yeah.
There's a weird thing about this movie anthropomorphizing some of the animals, but not all of them.
Yes, I did want to talk about that, right? Because this hawk never speaks. It clearly has enough intelligence to realize this lizard's in a bottle, and if I fly way up high and drop the bottle, it'll break and I can get the lizard, right? So like there's some, and the hawk continues to show other signs of intelligence, right? In a future scene, but never speaks. Another thing that's weird to me is all of the anthropomorphized animals in this movie ride roadrunners as if they're horses because this is a Western. And I'm like, what's the deal with the roadrunners?
Yeah.
Are they just less intelligent and it's like humans and horses? Or is this some kind of consensual arrangement? Are the roadrunners like, yeah, hop on, but we never hear them talk.
Yeah,
Yeah,
or they're enslaved
Oh, I don't like
second-class
that.
citizens or something. There's a really dark undercurrent to this film.
Yeah, and the same thing with the tunneling family of like possums or what, or not possums.
They're moles.
Moles.
They're mole rats.
Yes, mole rats. Yeah, who ride bats.
Yeah.
Right. Same kind of deal. Where I'm like, are the bats okay with this? It introduces a little bit of complexity for sure.
So the hawk drops Rango, and the bottle hits the frog to kind of break the fall.
Yeah.
And the frog gets pissed off, and the bottle's running, the bottle's rolling, and the frog starts running as well as the hawk is chasing them, and the frog is yelling at him like, "I'll kill you!" and stuff. Which you don't hear the word "kill" a lot in family movies.
No,
even if a character dies.
And in this movie, it happens a lot. There's lots of death threats in this movie, which I appreciated.
Yeah.
I'm glad that these cartoons are constantly threatening each other, threatening to send each other to the great beyond.
Another great unhinged line here. "I'll let you kiss my sister." And then the hawk grabs him and flies away, and presumably just eats him.
Yeah,
murders and eats him.
That frog is dead. And he's the first of a few deaths in this movie.
Yeah.
Again, family film, lots of people bite it. It's pretty cool.
Rango takes shelter in a pipe and has this great dream sequence.
Okay, so this and the other really weird vision dream sequence later in the movie are the best parts of the movie to me. I think I love the zany cartoon stuff where Rango's just bouncing around and it's gag after gag after gag. But more than that, I love when this movie gets super weird. So yes, you describe this dream sequence, but this and the other vision later in the movie are really what made this movie work for me.
Yeah, he dreams about the cactus kind of coming to life and sees them moving across the desert, he sees this huge image, this huge wind up, one of the wind up fish that was in the fish tank.
Yes, one of his acting partners,
Just
his scene partner.
Just he's in this kind of liminal space of like just white, and the fish just flooms into view and speaks with Alfred Molina's voice. Where are your friends now, amigo? He dreams of drowning, and that's what wakes him up, as this rush of water that kind of pushes him out of the pipe. Visually, this is a really great creative sequence.
Yeah, and it's also just so much weirder than things that are normally in this type of movie. Like it's so surreal and like strange, and I was like, oh, what is going on here? Which is not a feeling that you usually have watching a cartoon family film, right? Usually they're pretty by the numbers. Usually the plot's pretty linear, and they don't take weird diversions like this a lot of the time, which is, I appreciated this. I was like, oh, this is like a little bit of like high strangeness implanted in this film about a goofy little lizard. And we'll get to it when we get to it, but the more extended sequence later I like even more. But
yeah, I love the way this movie explores Rango's struggle with identity.
Yeah, it's like it's really delving into like the psychology of the character,
especially because for so much of this movie, we'll get into it, he is playing a character, and there are moments where you see his real insecurities slip through and break through into that character. But these kind of dream sequences and these moments where he's by himself, you really get to explore his personal struggle with identity, completely unfiltered.
Yeah. So anyway, he gets washed out of a pipe and wakes up from his dream, and all the water immediately evaporates. It's like water gets dumped on the desert floor. It all evaporates before he can drink any. And then, he's just out in the desert. And then this is where we meet Beans.
Yes.
Who is another lizard, a lady lizard, voiced by Isla Fisher, who I think does a great voice performance in this movie. I wanted to call her out as one of the strongest voice performances in the movie.
I think everyone does a great voice performance in this movie.
I agree.
Not to discount what Isla Fisher does, because obviously she's great, but every character in this movie sounds like they look.
Yes.
You look at that character and like, this character could only have one type of voice, and then they open their mouth and it's that voice that you thought of in your head.
Yeah. So Beans, the lizard here, first of all, she sees the water get dumped into the desert.
Yeah.
So she witnesses this.
And immediately sticks a shotgun in his face.
Right. and delivers a few great lines. There's just a few great readings here. I really like, "You aren't from around here, are you?" Which is great. But yeah, so she's basically like, "What are you doing out in the desert? I just saw you with all this water. Like, what's the deal?" Right?
Yeah.
And she starts getting upset at one point, and we learn one of her like weird character things is that she will just freeze sometimes when she gets upset.
Much like Mitch McConnell. She will sometimes freeze randomly in the middle of a speech.
Just man, that guy's brain just sometimes stops and he just has to buffer a little bit, huh?
Yeah.
It's so cool and good that guy is like in charge of a large portion of our government. I love that.
Every time I just know the angel of death is just sharpening that scythe, waiting for his time to come.
Oh man, I guess that's just what decades of being one of the most evil men in this country will do to you, is just literally break your brain. Anyway,
yeah, it's this catatonic state that she gets into.
Yeah.
Later it's explained that it's like a defense mechanism that lizards of her type have.
Right.
She gives him a ride into town on her wagon. Just outside of town. She literally drops him off at the sign outside of town.
Wait.
And she rides in.
Hold on really quick. There's one gag in that scene that I wanted to point out, because I thought it was really funny. So she's talking about her father who passed away. Her daddy lizard. And she's like talking about how like basically everyone thinks that he like wandered off like the edge of a quarry or something, or into a mine shaft or something, and fell to his death because he was drunk. And she was like, but he wasn't drinking. Like, she gets like really up in arms about that. And then at one point, Johnny Depp Lizard opens like a jar with some powder in it and starts like eating it, and he's like, oh, spicy. And she's like, you're eating daddy's ashes. And he's like, oh, like this is like oh, this is his remains. And she's like, no, like that, I just saved his ashes from like him ashing his cigarettes or whatever. She was like, they never found the body or whatever. Which I thought was so funny. Anyway,
the town's called Dirt.
Mm.
She drops him off outside of Dirt,
which, by the way, Dirt, Nevada, I believe that as a real place.
Oh, okay.
That, like, I totally believe that there's actually a Dirt, Nevada. There probably isn't, but it's the type of town name that like just a podunk little place in the Southwest would have.
He walks into town and runs into probably my favorite side character of the movie, which is Priscilla, played by Abigail Breslin. She's a little cactus mouse and just always says the most wild shit in this fucking movie.
Yeah.
She's kind of the precocious little kid, but she's not really annoying. She's just kind of like, she has really short sentences, is really dark.
Yeah.
And I love her so much. You're a stranger. Strangers don't last long around here.
Yeah.
And he starts trying to blend in and imitating the way that people walk. And it is very funny to watch the behind the scenes footage of Johnny Depp in a cowboy outfit, just trying to walk
behind someone the same way they're walking,
doing his lizard walk
in these really like extreme, like over the top Western type of gunslinger walks.
Swinging his hips around and walking with a really wide stance.
So he then goes into a saloon, right? Because he's thirsty, he's looking for something to drink. He goes into a saloon. It's the classic Western gag where he, the new stranger in town goes through the swinging saloon doors, and there's like jaunty piano music playing, and then it stops as soon as he walks through the doors, and everybody turns and looks at him. He walks up to the bar and he orders a glass of water, and everybody just starts roaring with laughter at this. They can't believe that this guy has the audacity to order a glass of water, and instead the bartender's like, cactus juice, it's what we got.
It's a little bottle that the outside of the bottle is a cactus with like spines and stuff.
They slide it. They do the thing where the bartender slides the drink across the bar and he catches it, but then the spines just go into his hand.
There's a little puddle of it, and a fly lands in the puddle of cactus juice, and
his eyeball pops
he just starts like flailing around, and his eyeball pops out and he dies. Would you drink cactus juice?
I would definitely drink cactus juice. You kidding me? Give me a shot of cactus juice right now. I'll drink some cactus juice.
Absolutely. They ask who he is, and we didn't mention this because it's just easier to call him Rango. This lizard does not have a name.
Yeah.
And
that's why I've been calling him Johnny Depp Lizard, because he's not Rango yet.
He's not Rango yet. He looks on the bottle of cactus juice and sees the word Durango imprinted on it, but he just sees the last half of it, so he just sees Rango.
Yeah.
And
he adopts this as his cowboy name.
He starts kind of building up this mythic legend. I'm from the West, out beyond the horizon. You know, we'll kill a man before breakfast just to work up an appetite.
And you kind of get the impression that him starting this lie about the legend of Rango, right, is a defense mechanism, because he's afraid that he's going to get the tar beaten out of him by all of these tough Western cowboy townies, right? So he's basically like, I have to convince them that I'm scarier than they are so that I don't get killed.
This is the spoiler alert. I loved this movie.
Mm-hmm.
We'll get to our verdicts, but I loved this movie. I clapped and said good movie multiple times in this movie. Because this movie goes surprisingly hard. And this is the first moment that I clapped at. You might say I'm from everywhere there's trouble brewing and hell waiting to be raised. You might say I'm what hell was already raised up. Name's Rango.
Yeah.
Go so hard for a PG-rated kids movie.
I really like. There's a lot of talk about hell in this movie.
Yeah.
Especially when Jake the Snake shows up.
Yeah.
He is talking about hell so much, and I'm like, wow, we're really implanting the idea of the lake of fire into these children's minds via this film, which I appreciated. Children should be afraid of hell. But but yeah, there's a funny gag here when he's kind of building up his own legend here, where he uses his the iconic chameleon tongue, very long and sticky. He grabs the toothpick out of another bar patron's mouth by shooting his tongue at the toothpick and sucking it into his own mouth, which is very funny. I like that little visual gag. I like when they make a visual gag out of him being a chameleon. Which again, I don't think they do enough in this movie. I think they could do it more. But yeah.
One of the there's tons of disgusting shit people in this movie.
Oh yeah.
They're all animals. I love all of them. This is probably our highest amount of disgusting shit people in this movie.
I guess there's less of them in TCM2, but those are some top tier.
Oh, sure.
Disgusting shit people.
Sure.
But yeah, no. This movie is full of garbage monsters.
Yeah.
Yes.
So one of the bar patrons, I don't have all their names written down or what animals they are. One of them says, "You the fella that killed them Jenkins brothers?" And Rango says, "Yeah."
And I did it with
one bullet. Another one's like, "All 7 of them."
which is, again, this is a very funny moment to someone who is an actor and knows a lot of people who do improv, right? Because Rango just sees this as an improv challenge, right? He's like, oh, I got myself into a situation where now I have to yes and, right? And just figure out how I killed 7 guys with 1 bullet.
Yeah.
And he does. God bless him, he does it. He's good at improv.
Yeah, we see most of the story off screen because we have a brief cutaway to the bank where Stephen Root, who voices a few characters in this movie, but he voices the banker here, Mr. Merrimack,
who's like a squirrel or something.
Yeah, he's a ground squirrel. He's the banker here, and Beans is at the bank asking for help. And I love this line where Merrimack says, "You've been a daughter to me. You've been like a daughter to me ever since your daddy did not fall drunk down a mine shaft."
Yeah,
because she's clearly sensitive about this.
Yeah,
and it's revealed here the town's out of water. The bank vault is basically this upside down water jug that has markings on it of how much water they have left.
Yeah.
And Bean says that she's seen water being dumped in the desert, and Merrimack just kind of laughs it off. It says let's go talk to the mayor about it. We cut back to the saloon, and Rango's finishing the story of killing the Jenkins brothers and how this 1 bullet killed them all. And the last one, what is it?
He's
the last one dies of a heart attack.
He gets like all 6, and he thinks he's done. And then they're like, "Well, that was only 6. What happened to the 7th one?" And he's like, "The 7th one? Well, dadgummit, he died of infection."
Right. Okay.
Which is very funny. Yeah.
And I think the bar loses their mind after this.
Right. And they were immediately like, "Oh, this guy's the coolest. He's like now the town hero, basically, because he has improv'd his way into these people's hearts."
Bad Bill shows up.
Yeah.
He's a Gila monster played by Ray Winstone.
Yes.
Which looks exactly like a Gila monster played by Ray Winstone.
Ray Winstone. I know I was talking up Johnny Depp and Isla Fisher's voice performances, and like David said, all the voice performances in this movie are pretty great. Ray Winstone just has one of the voices of all time.
Ray Winstone's one of my favorite actors.
Yeah.
That is consistently underused by people.
He sounds like a bridge troll. He sounds if the Three Billy Goats gruff was a real thing that happened, it would just be Ray Winstone underneath that bridge being like, "You gotta pay the toll. Nobody can cross my bridge without giving me something." I'm Ray Winstone, actual bridge troll.
Just this is the most Cockney anyone has ever been. He invented the Cockney accent.
It's so funny too, because this is like a western town in like Nevada, and then you just have this guy who just emerged from a sewer in London.
Yeah, he's got like the white wife beater and the suspenders and the bowler hat.
Yeah.
Just like,
Which is
who's this here then?
I think this character looks more like Ray Winstone's voice than actual Ray Winstone.
They both, I mean, Ray Winstone himself and Bad Bill both look like they were made out of shoe leather.
But yeah, so Bad Bill shows up in this bar and basically is unimpressed by Rango.
Yeah.
Unlike the rest of the townspeople.
Chomping on a big cigar.
Yeah. And again, Rango, because he's a fucking actor, has to yes and this scenario, right? Where he's like, well, I built myself up to be the toughest, and now there's a tougher guy in here. I gotta do something to show that I'm like bigger and badder than this guy. So he takes Ray Winstone's cigar, Bad Bill's cigar, out of his mouth with his chameleon tongue and puts it in his own mouth and eats it. Which is very funny. And then he chases it down with a shot of cactus juice and then belches fire into Bad Bill's face, this is a very funny cartoon gag.
Yeah.
You know, like this is one of those
very Looney Tunes.
Right. This is one of those moments where it's like, yes, this movie is just having fun being a cartoon, right? Because you can have someone eat a cigar, chase it down with liquor, and then burp fire into a guy's face. And Bad Bill is upset by this. Oh, and then to put out the fire on Bad Bill's face, he then throws more cactus juice on him, which makes the fire bigger, which is very funny. And so Bad Bill challenges him to a duel, right?
Yeah.
Pistols at noon.
Yeah, Bad Bill slides his gun across the bar to challenge him to a duel, and we go outside for a classic Western showdown in the middle of town.
That doesn't play here. It doesn't play at all in the movie, but that's very much the vibe.
As someone who is well versed in the Western films of Sergio Leone, tons of great, tastefully done Sergio Leone references in this movie.
Yeah, we didn't really talk about how much of a Western this is. Like, that's the primary genre that this is, right? It's a cartoon, it's a family film, but more than anything else, it is a Western. And you are a big fan of Westerns and have seen a ton of them.
Yes, I am a huge fan of Westerns. It's one of the genres that is closest to my heart, and particularly the tropes of the Western, as overdone as they are, play extremely well for me in almost every scenario. However, I think there are a lot of Westerns that are intentionally playing up the tropes to the point of becoming self-parody. Especially because a lot of the Western genre these days has been relegated to direct-to-video, direct-to-streaming movies with, B-list actors that your dad would know to attract them to it.
Yeah.
Or just like Western comedies like that shitty Adam Sandler movie, and then I think Seth MacFarlane did a shitty Western comedy too. This movie is, I think, legitimately a Western.
Yeah.
And knows the tropes, loves the tropes, is paying homage to the tropes, while also carving out its own unique niche beyond just the movies it influenced it.
Right. It's the best kind of parody, right? It's the best kind of parody film, which is one that works as a parody and also works as a direct reading of the genre.
Yeah,
right?
I have this on Blu-ray. It's sitting in the Western section of my collection, right in between the Proposition and the Revenant.
And I will say, as a contrast to David on this podcast, I have not seen very many Westerns. I'm pretty ignorant as far as Westerns go. I'm like aware of the tropes just through cultural osmosis, but I haven't seen a lot of Westerns, which may eventually lead into a difference of opinion on our overall feelings about the film. I feel like I might appreciate this movie more if I had more context for what it is doing to both parody and honor the Western in general.
Am I going to have to kill you on this podcast?
I don't know if you're gonna have to kill me, but we might be in a reverse Prince of Darkness scenario here.
Ooh, I've been waiting.
Yeah.
I've been waiting for my chance at revenge.
I intentionally kept my feelings about this movie secret from David until this record. I think you can tell so far that I don't hate this movie. I like this movie. But we may find ourselves in a little bit of a reverse Prince of Darkness scenario. We'll figure it out when we get to the end.
Yeah. But as far as like the way this is shot, tons of the kind of shots you would expect in a Western. A lot of tight close-ups on the characters' faces and the eyes and the squinting. That low hip shot over the holster. Rango takes his gun out and is sort of fumbling with the gun in his hands, and all of the bullets fall out.
Yeah, which is very funny when he's like, just give me a second. He says, T.O., quick T.O., which I thought was very funny.
His gun belt falls down to just a great little sequence. And then the shadow of the hawk gets cast over the town. The hawk's flying overhead and interrupts the fight.
Yes, Rango does not see the hawk initially. Bad Bill does, and starts basically Bad Bill and his cronies all kind of turn tail and run. And Rango thinks that he has essentially successfully intimidated Bad Bill away. And has won the duel by default, and gets a little cocky here for a second, which is again kind of a funny gag.
Yeah, very much like there's going to be some new rules around here.
Bad
kind
Bill's
of
like,
speech.
bloody hell, it's huge birds coming. I gotta get out of town. Back to London I go.
Back to old foggy London town. The hawk swoops down behind him, and Rango kind of nervously turns around and realizes the hawk's behind him, takes off and hides in an outhouse that's a Pepto-Bismol jug.
Yes.
One thing we should mention about Dirt is how great this town looks in terms of it's all built out of found objects.
Yeah.
Like this outhouse is a Pepto-Bismol jug. The saloon is like a gasoline can. Tons of great little visual gags and work that was made into designing this.
Yeah, and overall it looks pretty good. Like it succeeds at both looking like a town from a Western and also, looking like animals living in detritus. Right.
The hawk basically slashes the outhouse apart, and Rango takes off running through the back streets of the town.
Yes.
Dragging a roll of toilet paper behind him.
And here we get the first of two scenes in this movie, two pretty large set pieces where Rango, the hero of Dirt, destroys the entire town.
Yeah.
He brings so much calamity to this town and is never held accountable for it.
Yeah, the hawk just like blows through several buildings.
Yeah, because it's like following the little trail of toilet paper that he's tailing, and it's tailing him, right? And is just slamming into buildings, like knocking entire businesses over. Destroying people's homes.
Yeah, Rango hides in a vending machine, and this is the one moment where he uses his camouflage as he tries to blend in with a piece of candy.
Right.
Apparently the hawk knows how to operate a vending machine.
Yes, which again, what is the level of intelligence of this bird, and why is it not speaking?
And it's smirking while it does this.
Yeah. Yes, it takes the coin, puts the coin in, picks like F3 or whatever, whichever one he is in the machine, and buys itself a little Rango treat. But then he escapes by stringing some red vines together, right? He's got like some red licorice that he ties together as like a rope to get out of the vending machine. And so then the hawk, we repeat the gag of the hawk chasing the little trail that Rango's leaving, but now instead of toilet paper, it's like red vines. And again, chases him through town, smashes a bunch more buildings. Presumably, dozens of lives are lost in these collapsing buildings.
The town also seems like it's just one row of buildings on each side when he walks in.
Yeah.
But we get the way that this is the sequence is shot, we get the impression that there's a lot more buildings behind that initial row of buildings.
Right, there's like side alleys or whatever. Yeah.
But I don't think there actually are.
Yeah.
I think they just expanded the town for this one scene.
Yes, the geography of the town is a little confusing.
This string of Twizzlers, red vines, whatever licorice candy you choose. I don't like licorice, so who gives a shit?
like
Who
red vines?
gives a darn? Not the word that I said before.
I think you can say damn because they say damn once in this movie.
No, I said the poop word.
Oh no. David, this is a family podcast. David, there's kids listening.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry, children. He shoots the Twizzlers with his gun that are tied to him because the hawk's tugging on it.
Yeah.
And he's grabbing onto the water tower, and the water tower, which is filled with rocks, falls over and kills the hawk.
Yes. Second death in this movie, right? We had the frog earlier, and now the hawk is dead. And this is not where it ends. More characters will be taken across the river Styx in this movie. Which again, I appreciate. I appreciate that we're killing characters in this kids movie.
Yeah. The townsfolk are celebrating. They tell him he should go meet the mayor, and he does. We see the aftermath of that scene with Beans and Mr. Merrimack as they walk out of the mayor's office pretty angry.
Yeah.
And we meet the mayor, who is a tortoise in a wheelchair, voiced by Ned Beatty.
Right.
And is clearly not at all the main antagonist to this movie when he says, control the water, control everything, and then opens up a drawer of his personal private stash of water.
He has the exact same vibe as Mr. Waternoose from Monsters Incorporated, who's like the head of the scare factory in that movie, where it's just like the voice performance is so menacing and the character design is a little too scary for this to be a like a good character. So immediately you're like, this guy's the bad guy, right? But yeah, he's like the fat cat mayor, who's got his own private stash of water while the town is dying of thirst, basically. I have one gripe with the animation in this movie. I think overall the animation, I think ILM did a fantastic job. I think a lot of this movie looks really, really good. Rango's character design specifically, like anytime we're really close in on his face, the animation looks really, really good on him. I think the mayor's animation is occasionally shoddy. I think his facial animation, there were a few moments where I was like, not totally working for me. Some of these textures are like hitting my brain and my eyes weird. I don't know enough about animation to really articulate the problem that I had with it, but I didn't think it was the best character animation in the movie. But Ned Beatty's voice performance, very, very good.
Yeah, I think the animation in this movie is consistently great to the point where I didn't even really notice any issues with the mayor. He's also, he's in the wheelchair. He's not doing a lot of the kind of big gestures that the other characters are doing. But that's a good point about the texture, because there's so many great fur and skin textures in this movie.
Mm.
And maybe some of his skin texturing just isn't quite up to par with everything else.
Yeah, I think the only reason it stood out to me was because everything else looked so good. Like, I think in like a DreamWorks animated picture, I would have been like, oh yeah, it looks great or whatever. But I think having ILM on this and everyone else looking so good, just kind of made like the weak point stand out like a little bit stronger to me. But again, I don't know anything about animation, so maybe it's just a me problem.
Yeah, the mayor says to Rango that people have something to believe in, and now they believe in you, and hands him a sheriff badge.
Yeah, now it's Sheriff Rango.
Yeah, so we have Rango over at the tailor,
Mm.
getting his sheriff duds. He threatens to shoot a child, which is great.
Yes, it is very funny when he's just sticking that gun in that kid's face. And then he gives the kid an autograph instead. Or what is he signing here? There's something where the mom is upset. It's
I don't remember.
He signs the Bible. That's what it is. So he signs an autograph for the kid, and then he grabs a Bible out of the mom's hands, who's still upset that Rango was sticking a gun in her kid's face, and then he opens the Bible and signs the first page of the New Testament, which is a funny little gag. And she's like kind of scandalized by this or whatever.
Yeah, he's really playing up the gunslinger persona where it's like, don't sneak up behind me, and
Yeah,
playing the rock star gunslinger
yeah,
thing. So that's why he pulls a gun on a kid.
yeah. And we have him kind of swaggering through town here.
Yeah, the townspeople are following him around. This whole time, Beans is trying to talk to him about the water,
Right.
because she's freaked out about it. I love this character design of the spider tailor / undertaker, who has like a top hat and these glasses on, almost like steampunk glasses,
right,
with like different lenses and such.
Yeah. And this character design is only used once for a visual gag, right? Because here they're basically like, I think it's Beans who is like, essentially saying, because Rango's like so uppity because he's now the mayor, right? And she basically warns him and is like, mayors don't last long here. Or not mayors, sorry, sheriffs. I said mayor a bunch of times just now. Just replace all of those with sheriff in your head. Sheriffs don't last long here. And we get he's basically like, what happened to last sheriff or whatever. And there's a visual gag, of this spider guy that David was just describing, just putting nails into a coffin. And he's only used once for this visual gag, and I'm like, I wish we saw this spider guy more. He's like wearing a little top hat.
Yeah. I'm sure he's in the background a bunch, but this is the only scene that he's really featured in.
I wish he was part of the posse. That would be funny.
Yeah. So the townsfolk all wander out to the streets to do their water dance.
Yes, and this is another moment where this movie gets weird and surreal, because like all of this relatively normal Western stuff has been happening, and then all of a sudden, all of the townspeople at an exact time, it's like 3 o'clock or 4 o'clock or something, I don't remember.
Every Wednesday.
Yeah, and they all go out in the street, form lines, and start doing a weird ritualistic dance and marching toward a spigot. David, it is crazy that this movie came out before Mad Max Fury Road.
There's a couple things about this movie.
Yes.
It's a Western.
Yes.
It's also Dune.
Yes.
It's also Mad Max Fury Road.
Before Mad Max Fury Road came out. But this scene, so all the townspeople march up to the water spigot, and the mayor is up there with like his secretary or whatever. So it's like the town's elite are kind of up at the top of the spigot, and they raise up like the big wheel that is used to turn and open the spigot. And it is literally almost exactly the scene from Mad Max Fury Road. It's literally, do not, my friends, become addicted to water. It's the same thing, to the degree where I had to look up which movie came out first. And I was like, oh, that's nuts. I wonder if George Miller saw Rango and was like, hey, cool idea for my Mad Max movie.
Well, I know Gore Verbinski cited Mad Max as an inspiration for an action sequence.
Okay.
That's coming up.
And that inspiration's pretty obvious when you see that scene.
Right.
So maybe
But this too is like weirdly prescient about water issues.
Maybe it's just mutual influence. Maybe Gore is influenced by George Miller and vice versa. It would be very funny if George Miller was just a huge Rango fan. I mean, he did make Happy Feet, so
yeah,
maybe.
Another moment of foreshadowing here. We're introduced to Wounded Bird, played by a great Native American character actor, Gil Birmingham.
Yeah, who's in a bunch of stuff.
And Wounded Bird is a very characterized as kind of the stoic Native American tracker, which is unfortunate. He's kind of really the only character in this movie that verges into stereotype for me.
Yes, it's basically the classic Native American character in a Western trope. And I say that as someone who hasn't seen a lot of Westerns, but like just through cultural osmosis, I have interpreted that this character sometimes pops up in Westerns.
Yeah.
Where it's basically like, yes, the one Native American character is like very in touch with nature and very spiritual and kind of speaks in a way that is vague and hard for the white characters to understand literally, right? They speak in a lot of metaphor or whatever. And it's like, okay, on the one hand, yes, you have an indigenous actor playing this character. On the other hand, it still reads as a little dated in 2011.
I'll leave it to the audience to decide whether or not this is having Gil Birmingham play a bird that is a Native American is better or worse than Johnny Depp playing a Native American
Yes.
in The Lone Ranger.
Yes, in a live action film. Yeah. Yeah.
But Wounded Bird says, "You kill bird, snake come." And Rango asks Priscilla, the little mouse played by Abigail Breslin, what he means, and she says, "That's Rattlesnake Jake." And Rattlesnake Jake was afraid of the hawk.
Yes.
But now that the hawk's gone,
he's going to come.
He's going to come.
Yep.
So we go to the bank, and we see that the town, it's revealed to the town that there's almost no water left.
Yeah.
And Rango tries to give this inspiring speech, and he hasn't had a drink this whole movie. Starts sneaking a few drinks out of the jug.
Yes, again in the pretense of improv.
Yeah. We cut to later that night, and Rango's walking in the street in his new duds.
Yes.
And this big musical, this big Western theme with an electric guitar. I want to talk about the music.
Yeah.
I think this music fucking rules. I think this music freaking rules.
Yes. It is it's your gosh darn tootin', David. No, it's I really like the music in this movie too. Hans Zimmer did the score. And a lot of the original scoring in this movie is very good. The mariachi stuff is great. The Rango theme is great. Rango. It's very good. It's very catchy. It's very fun. The only music in this movie that I didn't care for is in the Mad Max inspired chase sequence. In pretty close succession, we get Ride of the Valkyries and Blue Danube. And I'm like, okay, those are both very tropey, very obvious needle drops, one right after the other. And the Ride of the Valkyries one worked for me. Blue Danube had me rolling my eyes a little bit.
I think that's fair.
Yeah.
I would agree with that. But I love this music. It is very clearly influenced by Ennio Morricone and a lot of the great spaghetti Western composers. But it does this other thing, like this movie, where it rises above the influences and the things that it's imitating to actually become just a really good score on its own.
Yeah.
Obviously Gore Verbinski worked with Hans Zimmer on Pirates, but I was watching this and I'm like, there's no way he brought him back for the Lizard Cowboy movie.
He did.
And he did. And I think Hans Zimmer gets a bit of a mixed reputation. I think he has some really great scores and then some other scores that he kind of phones it in on.
Yeah.
I think he really did a good job on this.
I agree. I think this one rocks. Yeah, good score.
So Rango's strolling through streets. Rango's strolling through the streets, and he sees some moles digging in the street.
Yes.
Not at all suspiciously.
They
but,
pop out of the middle of the street and immediately say, "This ain't the bank."
And Rango is kind of clueless here and strolls over to them. The Balthazar is the leader of these moles here, who is, I think, portrayed to be totally blind.
Yes, he's a blind mole, which is funny.
Played by Hayden Stanton.
Yes.
And Rango gives him a permit for prospecting.
Yes. Yeah, because he's like, you boys shouldn't be doing this, prospecting without a permit. And he writes him a permit and gives him a bunch of, like, mining equipment. And then points them toward the bank. Because they ask, like, where, Rango's, like, talking up the bank. He's like, the greatest financial institution this side of the Mississippi. And, like, it points them toward the bank. And they're like, oh, would you know how to get there? And he's like, oh, yeah. And so he basically helps them rob the bank.
Yeah, and the next morning...
Bank's been robbed.
Bank's been robbed! The bank's been robbed! I hurt my voice doing that.
Yeah.
Wow.
Be careful. And then, yeah, Rango basically immediately goes into damage control mode here because, like, when they're investigating the crime scene, they find the prospecting permit. Like, one of the townspeople is like, "What's this? Permit for prospecting?" And he, like, snatches it away and he's like, "I'll take that. Crucial evidence." Or whatever. So he immediately knows that he messed up here.
Yeah. And he forms a posse to go looking for them.
Yep.
And there's a lot of... We meet so many of the background characters in this movie. They're all great. They all have great characteristics to them and fun jokes with them. I'm not going to go into detail with them, but...
Yeah. I did want to point out another... Not a major issue, but another, like, minor gripe I have with this movie is the posse characters particularly, but also just all of the townspeople. I'm always really clear on what all of the bird and reptile characters are in this movie. some of the mammals, I'm like, I don't know what this character is supposed to be. I look at some of them and I'm like, I get that this guy's furry. Is he a rat? Is he a squirrel? Is he a gopher? Is he what? You know, there's a few of the character designs for the mammals that I think are a little bit too messy to read clearly for me versus the reptiles and birds, which I think they do a better job at designing so that they both are clearly like designed to be the character that they are, but also stand in for like a real world animal. Just a very, very minor gripe.
Yeah, I think I'd agree with that.
Yeah,
for sure. But now we form a posse and we ride.
Yep. And this is a great sequence. This is a really, really fun sequence where they're just going across the desert tracking these mole bank robbers
with beautiful, gorgeous shots.
Yes. Roger Deakins, I'm sure this is maybe what you were about to say.
Yeah, Deakins popped off with this animated lizard movie.
Yes, so Roger Deakins, obviously legendary cinematographer. He was a like visual consultant on this movie, basically. So he did the CGI equivalent of cinematography, kind of, on this movie. And yeah, it looks great. There's a lot of really good shots in here, where I'm like, yeah, you can see that Roger Deakins worked on this, which is impressive for an animated movie.
Yeah. And I love this whole sequence is so beautiful and rousing, and the music's great. And then at one point, one of the posse asks, "Where are we riding to?" And Rango kind of has stops and thinks for a moment, and then we immediately cut to them just riding back into town because they don't know where they didn't know where they were going.
Yeah.
They do. They go to explore the hole that was dug by the moles, and they get underground and find the pipe that used to run water to the town every day. And they follow it through this cave to an aquifer.
Yeah.
With torches and everything. Kind of a brief little Indiana Jones passage in the middle of this movie.
And really quick, there is a very surreal and weird gag here, which I love. This is one of my favorite jokes in the movie, where they're kind of hopping across these like little platforms elevated by stalactites or whatever, or stalagmites. Yeah, mites are the ones from the bottom. And so the like kind of hopping across these, and it's like a wide shot. It kind of reminded me of like the Bridge of Khazad-dûm in the first Lord of the Rings movie. That's for Tony Machete, by the way, my Lord of the Rings reference, because he was getting on my case about including too many of those. In the background, it looks just like a cave wall. And then it opens, and it's just an enormous eye. It's like a massive eye that takes up the entire screen. And all the characters that we know are like tiny little dots on the screen, right? So whatever this thing is, it's huge. And one of the posse members just goes, "Oh, that's a big one." And it's such a weird joke.
And it never comes back. We don't know what this creature is.
It's not like there's a chase sequence with this thing. It's not a threat to them at all. It's just a visual gag that the whole background of this cave shot is just some creature, some eldritch abominations, some elder god's massive eye, you know? And I'm like, there's no reason to include that joke in this movie, because I don't know if kids will find that funny, but like that joke was for me, you know? And I was like, that rocks. I love that they like not only thought of that, but animated it and included a line of dialogue directly referencing what you were seeing. Like they made it a moment, and it didn't have to be. Wanted to isolate that one because it was really fun to me.
Yeah, I agree. It's a great moment. And one thing about the animation, since we're talking about eyes, the eyes in this movie look great.
They do.
They're so detailed and colorful, and there's a lot of close-ups with them, obviously, because that's a huge trope in Westerns, is the close-up on the eyes. And moments where something's reflected in a character's eye, just stunning work. This top to bottom, this movie looks incredible. And it came out more than 10 years ago.
Yeah. And
I can't think of another animated film from this era that still holds up as good as this movie does. Visually.
Yeah, I'd agree with that.
They find a passage that leads to the surface, and they climb up to the surface and find these cacti that are dying of thirst, much like my cactus Francois.
Yeah. And they camp out for the night here.
Yeah,
And
well, there's a couple things.
oh yeah.
They find Mr. Merrimack dead and apparently drowned.
Oh yeah. Okay. So this is another moment where I'm like, this is a kid's movie, and not only is this character just fully dead, because when they first come across his body, I'm thinking, oh, he's gonna like come back to life. He's gonna not really be dead because this is a kid's movie. No, this is a squirrel's corpse that they stumble across, drowned. And also, there's like a moment here where they do the thing where they like close his eyes, like he's like dead with his eyes open, and one of them like does the little thing where they run their hand across his forehead to shut his eyelids. And I was like, this is really like kind of heavy for a kid's movie.
Yeah.
I thought this moment rocked.
Yeah, and this is Doc is the doctor who's a rabbit, and he's also voiced by Stephen Root, like Mr. Merrimack. So it's Stephen Root coming across the body of Stephen Root.
Yes.
And they say that he says that Mr. Merrimack was drowned, and they discover that the ground is still wet.
Right. And that's obviously very strange because there's a huge water shortage.
Yeah. And Wounded Bird is off in the distance, and Rango goes over to talk to him, and Wounded Bird, because he's a Native American stereotype that can track people and is in tune with nature, says we get two very unhinged lines in this movie in quick succession. This is one of them. He says, "Men heading west, one blind, one with enlarged prostate."
Yes. And then there's a really funny follow-up to that gag where like the rest of the posse is like, oh, like, what did he say? And he's like, like one of them heard one part of what he said, and then somebody else, like they kind of do a bad telephone down the line, and one of the last lines in this little gag is, "Someone's got a bad valve." Which I thought was funny.
So now we ride again, and we get more incredible shots.
Yes, this is also the moment where Rango's like, now we ride, and the mariachi band doesn't immediately start playing, and he basically like says it again. He's like, "I said," right, so that the band starts playing.
Yeah,
which is funny.
And now we end up at the campfire, and I don't even remember what they're all talking about because I only remember this line. This is the second of the unhinged lines in this movie.
I know which one you're gonna say, and it made me stop in my tracks.
They're all talking. Spoons is kind of one of those mammal creatures, and he says, "I found a human spinal column in my fecal matter once."
I think they're all just talking about weird things they ate.
Yeah.
And his contribution, yes, is that he found a human spinal column in his fecal matter.
Again, insane thing to include in this PG-rated movie.
Yeah. It's one of those moments where I was just like, they had Stephen Root. Is it Stephen Root? No, it's a different.
It could be. He voices several characters in this movie.
But regardless, they had this voice actor record this line of dialogue. They animated it. They presumably showed it to test audiences, people at the studio. It got past all of that and made it into the final cut of this film.
Nickelodeon was like, "Yeah, put this in our movie."
Yes. Human spinal column in a pile of doo-doo. We want that in our film. Very weird moment that I just like that this movie has the balls to do that.
I like this campfire sequence in general. Like, after we get past those unhinged lines, we hit upon a few pretty sweet, genuine moments in this movie. They ask him about the spirit of the West, and he recites that legend that Roadkill told him at the beginning. Spoons leads them in this prayer to the spirit of the West.
They say a prayer to the spirit of the West, which when we find out what the spirit of the West is, it's very funny to think that they are saying a prayer to the spirit of the West.
And I like this moment with Beans too. It's really good.
And this is kind of a nice moment between Rango and Beans. She pretends to freeze here, pretends to do her little stasis thing, and he gives her a little peck on the cheek, and then we see that was a ploy by her to kind of see how he would react, and she's pleased that he's given her a little smooch. So there's a little blossoming romance here.
They come across the moles the next morning. The moles are in have a fortress. It's like a Native American ruin in the side of a wall, very much like from northern Arizona, Montezuma Castle.
Yes. It also just has massive Mad Max vibes. And this leads into the most Mad Max this movie gets,
Yeah.
right?
But Rango decides to pretend to be a theater troupe to get in close.
As much as I love the gag, this plan makes no sense.
No.
No sense whatsoever. Because basically what they do is put on a stupid little play where Rango has to dress up as a lady, and they do their little theater production in order for them to just pull guns on the moles.
Yeah.
And I'm like, why couldn't you just pull guns on the moles?
And I like the mariachi band is also in this scene, and they were dressed in like Renaissance costumes.
Yes, and they have to play like Elizabethan, like Shakespeare era music.
They
They look annoyed by
Yeah.
it, which is very funny.
Yeah.
But yeah, so they pull guns on the moles. The jig is up or whatever.
There's one line here where Rango says like, "We're a group of traveling thespians," and Harry Dean Stanton says, "What's that?" And one of the moles says, "Thespians," and he goes, "Thespians? That's illegal in 7 states."
Yes. Which I feel like that's such a classic. I almost feel like that's like a 90s joke.
Yeah.
That is included in this movie from 2011. Someone mistaking the word thespian for lesbian. I feel like I've seen that in so many movies. But anyway, so then they try and arrest the moles for robbing the bank. And they're basically like, "We've got you outnumbered, like you and your whole family." And Harry Dean Stanton's like, "My whole family." And then this movie very briefly turns into like The Hills Have Eyes. Because out of the ground, 1,000 horrifying mole people just emerge from the dirt with knives and guns and clubs, and they are chanting like this weird kind of battle chant where they're saying stuff like booger blood, and it becomes very scary for like 15 seconds.
Have I mentioned this movie goes hard?
Yeah, this is another one of my favorite moments of the movie, is just all the mole people coming up out of the ground like they are in Silent Hill. I expected to see Pyramid Head in here. But yeah, and then Rango and the posse realize that they are horribly outnumbered by these moles.
Yeah. There's a bit of a standoff, and then Spoons is trying to give a signal because he's up top trying to give the signal.
His role in the plan was to give the signal, and he starts doing 1,000 signals at once. He's like smoke signals. He's like banging his spoons together. He's like, and then the last thing he does is fires a gun off into the air, which makes the boar or the javelina, who is like their who was pulling the wagon that they stole the water with, the mole people, makes the javelina freak out, and it starts running amok, which gives Rango and the crew time to essentially jump on the wagon and escape with the water jug.
Yeah. So chaos breaks out, and the moles take off in bats.
Yes, which is where we get Ride of the Valkyries.
Which get Ride of the Valkyries. They're bats with Gatling guns.
Yes.
And we find out that there are moles playing Ride of the Valkyries on the banjo.
Yes.
On the back of the bats.
Yes. And they also have like sticks of dynamite, which then leads to some pretty hilarious gags where, as if it is a plane in a World War II movie, when one of the bats gets like hit by one of our heroes in the posse, it'll like spiral into a canyon wall, and then because the moles have dynamite, it'll just explode in a huge ball of fire. Which, and again, these moles are dead.
Yeah.
These moles and bats are deceased. They are gone, like out of this mortal coil.
Yeah, we don't see a ton of like people getting shot, but we're shooting guns off.
Yeah.
These bats are exploding and
Yes.
crashing into the canyon walls. Actually, we do have this great gag because like I think Beans and Rango are riding at the front of the wagon, and these two moles ride up on either side of him, and I think Beans and Rango duck, and the moles shoot each other in the face.
Yeah.
And what really happens is they just sort of spiral backward and hit the side of the canyon.
But yeah, this is the Mad Max chase sequence that
Mad
we were
Max
talking
chase
about
sequence.
before. It's very Mad Max, because it's like in this little slot canyon in the desert, and there's like 1,000 disgusting desert freaks pursuing our heroes, which is really Mad Max.
Yeah, it rocks. The Blue Danube sequence that Justus alluded to earlier, Rango gets caught by a rope that one of the moles is dragging behind his bat, and he starts sort of flying through the air, and he gets into the moment and just starts kind of drifting, and while the Blue Danube is playing,
and he's still wearing
still in the dress,
Beans' dress, so he's like soaring through the air as a pretty lady. Pretty lady Johnny Depp lizard. And the Blue Danube. That's hard to say. Blue Danube. The needle drop there just doesn't work for me as much. I kind of wish that Hans Zimmer had maybe just done like his own little thing here instead of just picking a song that's used in every movie of all time. But yeah, still kind of a silly fun moment.
Yeah. Rango lands back on the wagon. I like this moment where Beans punches a mole off the wagon, and then Rango lands and surprises her, so she punches him too in the face.
Pretty funny.
The wagon eventually crashes.
Yes.
And the jug rolls down the side of a hill, and they find there's no water in the jug.
Right.
And the chase stops, and the moles and Rango's posse gather around, and they talk about this.
Yes, and Harry Dean Stanton's like, no water? What have we been fighting for? And then this is a moment this is probably the plot beat that works the least well for me in this movie, because then, despite the fact that there are still 800 mole people here, for some reason, Harry Dean Stanton and his two sons who robbed the bank just allow themselves to be arrested, knowing that they are going to be hanged for stealing the water. And I'm like, why? They're still super outnumbered by these mole people. Why did they let this happen?
Yeah,
why did
I
they
don't
just
know.
surrender to the law here? This was very confusing. Oh, I did want to mention, by the way, again, very ballsy thing to include in a kids movie. One of the things that Harry Dean Stanton's character is doing throughout this scene and like some of the previous ones is just beating the ever-loving hell out of one of his own kids. And he's like, why can't you be more like your brother? And he's just like beating the piss out of him with this walking stick that he's got. And I was like, wow, this is pretty extreme for a kids movie, where he's just like smacking the shit out of his kid. It's pretty funny.
Yeah.
Anyway, so yeah, they get arrested and brought back into dirt.
Yeah, and the moles do say, like, we broke into the bank, but there's no water in there. But Rango and the posse return home in defeat, and a crowd from dirt is gathered around, and they're sad about not having any water.
Abigail Breslin with her Abigail Breslin's character with her enormous saucer eyes, looking so sad, is like, you said you were gonna bring back the water.
I know, she's my favorite. I love her so much.
So they brought back the mole people to be hanged for their crimes, but they didn't bring back any water, so the townspeople are not so happy.
Rango goes to play golf with the mayor.
Yes.
And Bad Bill. And I love Ray Winstone, Gila Monster, Bad Bill. I love his little golfing outfit here.
Yes.
Rango notices someone's shoes covered in mud, and he's suspicious of that.
Right, because he saw the same mud at the scene where Mr. Mac had been drowned. Yeah.
And he tells the mayor about water being dumped in the desert, and that the mole people who robbed the bank didn't find any water in the bank. And the mayor is building something out here.
Yeah.
And he talks about how he's been here forever, and he saw the March of Progress and learned something, and gives a speech about the age of the West and the gunslingers is coming to an end. Not at all suspicious.
Yeah, and Rango does start. I mean, Rango has picked up on this and starts making some soft accusations against the mayor in this scene, where he's basically like kind of hinting that he knows that the mayor is the one who is making sure that the town doesn't get any water.
Yeah, kind of makes us an accusation that the mayor killed Mr. Merrimack. He says, he just is that what he found in the desert, and that's why he killed him. And Rango takes off, and the mayor turns to Bad Bill and says, "Bring in Rattlesnake Jake."
Yeah, and then Bad Bill's reaction here is like, "Rattlesnake Jake, he's a stone cold killer. He never comes to town without taking a soul." Which I love. I love that that's how they phrase this. And yeah, man, Rattlesnake Jake, I'm excited to get to him because he was one of my favorite parts of this movie. Anyway,
Mine too.
Yeah.
Mine too. We're almost there.
Yeah.
We go back to the jail. The mariachi band is playing another song about Rango dying in the jail while they're hanging from nooses.
yes, yeah, which is a very funny visual gag.
Wounded Bird and Beans are there, and they're talking about how the mayor's bought up all of the land except for Beans's ranch. And they're talking and strategizing with Rango, and then they hear townspeople in the streets with torches, and they're mad because there ain't no water.
Your classic torch and pitchfork mob, and they basically just want to string up the mole people because they want somebody to be punished for their misfortune.
Rango goes outside and says, Rango goes outside to restore law and order and gives a speech about law and order, and says, as long as that sheriff sign hangs in this town, there will be law and order, and we have hope. And it's immediately destroyed by gunfire from off screen.
Yes, by like a barrage of machine gun fire, basically. And we are now introduced to the best villain in the movie. The best character in the movie. Rattlesnake Jake, voiced by Bill Nighy. Second Bill Nighy appearance on the Greatest Movie Ever Made podcast.
Yeah.
Very, very different Bill Nighy appearance. Because he was just the sweetest dad anyone could ever have in About Time. And in this, he is a rattlesnake with a Gatling gun for a rattle, who talks about how he came from the pits of hell and is here to bring death and destruction to the town of dirt.
Threatens to murder multiple characters in this movie.
Yeah. Also, it does the family cartoon version of like weird sexual advances kind of on Beans a little bit. He licks her face at one point, and which he's a snake, so he's got the snake tongue thing.
Yeah. We're gonna do some tongue jokes for sure.
Yeah. But so he slithers into this scene, and a thing that we didn't mention before is that Rango has been, in order to build up his own legend, he has claimed that Rattlesnake Jake is his brother, that he and Rattlesnake Jake are brothers, which there's a funny line about that where one of the townspeople is like, how are you brothers if he's a snake and you're a lizard? And his response is, Ma had a very active social life. But anyway, so Rattlesnake Jake shows up and immediately is his approach, instead of just shooting Rango, is psychological torment and public humiliation.
He's trying to break down Rango and expose him as a liar.
Yeah.
And calls him brother.
Yeah.
And gives him a shot glass of venom from one of his fangs, because I think another joke is that
Rango said that he like takes his coffee with snake venom or something. Yeah.
And I want to talk about, there's so many things I want to say about Rattlesnake Jake.
Yeah.
He has like a black hat on.
Right.
And kind of a handlebar mustache.
Yeah, it's like a coloration of the scales right above his mouth,
right,
that look like a mustache. Yeah.
Hot take for you, Justus.
Yeah.
This snake's kind of hot. I kind of want to fuck this snake.
I think really what it is just Bill Nighy's voice performance is very, like, he's doing a villain voice, but he's also kind of doing a bedroom voice a little bit. I think that's taking this a little bit over that line, probably. Yeah. I don't know that I necessarily agree that the snake is hot, but I can see where you're coming from. He's definitely, this is a movie full of ugly characters, like intentionally ugly characters, like they're designed to look like garbage. And Jake the Snake is one of the more elegant and flashy designed characters, so there's that too. But you're just smiling at me because I don't think I've hit the nail on the head. You actually kind of just want to fuck the snake.
I want to fuck that snake.
Okay, I don't know if you should be saying that this many times. Also, this is a family.
This is a family podcast. Oh no! What have I done?
No more talk about your snake interacting with Jake the rattlesnake.
He's kind of doing a little bit of his Davy Jones voice, but
Yeah.
just like adapting it to a typical Western kind of Southern drawl.
Yeah.
And really stretching out a lot of the syllables. Like, he's not quite doing that like a hissy snake cartoon voice, but he's doing it a little bit, but adding that kind of grit to it as well.
Yeah. But yeah, great voice performance, great character design. Jake the rattlesnake Jake rules. He when I was watching this movie, by the way, I was watching it the Podmaster had already gone to bed. I was watching it by myself on my couch, and our younger dog Sonora was watching it with me, and she seemed to be enjoying the movie. She was like paying attention to what was happening on the screen. As soon as Rattlesnake Jake showed up, she left, and I think it got too scary for her. she just couldn't handle the dark turn that it took when Rattlesnake Jake showed up. I think I think he freaked her out a little bit. Anyway.
There's a moment here where Jake kind of sticks the barrel of Rango's gun into one of the holes of the Gatling gun that he has as a rattle, and all of the bullets of the gun fall out except one, because Rango only needs one bullet.
Mm-hmm.
And gives the gun back to Rango and basically dares him to pull the trigger.
Yeah.
And
do it, pussy, you won't.
Basically. And it exposes him as a fraud. And Rattlesnake Jake takes off saying, "If I ever see you again, I'll take your soul straight down to hell."
Yes. So he basically makes Rango confess to the townspeople that he lied to them and isn't really this legendary gunslinger. He's just a loser.
Which is kind of a well-worn trope of children's animated movies.
It is.
The character exposed as a fraud.
Yeah.
I think it works for me here.
I think it works for me because of what happens next in the movie. Because the next thing that happens in most children's movies, if this was a regular kids movie, what would happen next is Rango would leave town, go out into the desert, and like beans would come follow him, and they would have a conversation that changed his mind and caused him to go back. Or Abigail Breslin's character would follow him into the desert and convince him to come back or something. That's what a normal kids movie would do. Instead, he goes on a psychedelic vision quest.
Well, and the other thing, I'm thinking of like Chicken Run, because there's the rooster that's
Right.
exposed as a fraud.
Yeah. Same sort of deal where he's basically an actor pretending to be a hero.
Right, but he's not the main character.
Right.
And we're with the main characters the whole time and don't really notice that this character is a fraud until it's revealed, and it's kind of a reveal not only to the main characters of the movie, but to the audience. And here, because so much of the movie is invested in Rango's identity and his search for who he is, it works for me and it plays fine. And he goes on his vision quest.
Yes. So Rango flees town, right? Rattlesnake Jake drives him out of town. He goes out into the desert. He returns to the highway where he met
More beautiful cinematography here.
Yes. Yeah, when he's taking his pilgrimage across the desert.
Yeah.
It does look really nice. He returns to the highway where he kind of was launched out of the back of the car at the beginning of the movie. And then what this movie does is our protagonist is having an identity crisis. He basically has had this moment where he's like, who am I? I'm nobody, right? And he walks into traffic. Which is, watching this on my couch for this record, I was like, this is a part of the movie, by the way. I said earlier that I might have seen this movie before. I certainly remembered more of it than I had any right to if I haven't. This is a moment I did not remember. It's so crazy for this to happen in a kid's movie because this is like so dark. This is like borderline suicidal, right? He just walks into traffic into like a busy highway with no regard for his own life, right? And makes it to the other side of the road. But it's kind of this really powerful moment. This begins my favorite movement of this film, right? Is him walking across the road, and he gets to the other side, which was referenced before in the scene with Alfred Molina's armadillo character, right? And when he gets to the other side, he then sort of passes out on the other side of the road and wakes up, and he's in this featureless desert, right? Before, in the desert, there's been some scrub, some cactus, some stuff. This is basically just flat, like, lake bed desert, and it's just basically like white dirt as far as the eye can see.
And it's all it's all blindingly white, and
Yes.
it's we get the sense that he's crossed over into some kind of spiritual plane.
Yes. And then we see a golf cart with a bunch of Oscar statues in the back, and the camera, or the digital camera, pans up to the Oscar statues in the back of this golf cart, and Rango goes, Golden Guardians, and then it like pans over to the white golf cart, and he says, an alabaster carriage, right? And this is the Spirit of the West. And who is it, David?
He looks off in the distance, sees the shadow of a cowboy,
Yeah.
and the
With a
spirit,
metal detector.
with a metal detector. And the Spirit of the West is voiced by Timothy Olyphant, doing a Clint Eastwood impression.
Yes.
Because the Spirit of the West is basically Clint Eastwood in his Man with No Name garb from the Sergio Leone movies.
Yes. This is so weird. And I love how weird it is, because we have seen one other scene in this movie with human characters, and it's when Rango is launched out of the back of the car. We do see like the two people driving the car that he's in, but that's the only humans we've seen in this movie. Every other character has been an animal. The choice to make the Spirit of the West Clint Eastwood and have an animated CGI human being, which, by the way, the animation on the Spirit of the West looks pretty good. It's a pretty good animated,
pretty great, yeah.
Clint Eastwood. The choice to have this be the Spirit of the West who is talking to a lizard, a chameleon, it is so surreal and so strange, and I love it so much. And I can't imagine an 8-year-old watching this and really getting it. But it's not for them. This moment is not for the kids, right?
I think I must have seen this in the theater, because I do remember the reveal of the Spirit of the West, and I'm like, and at that point I had seen all the Sergio Leone films. I had seen plenty of Clint Eastwood westerns, and I'm like, oh, they're going there.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's really weird and really cool.
And I kind of love it.
Yeah. And there is a funny moment here where oh gosh, who's the actress?
It's Rango asks, "Is this heaven?"
Yeah.
And Clint Eastwood the Spirit of the West says, "If it were, we'd be eating Pop-Tarts with Kim Novak."
Kim Novak, that's who it is. Yeah.
Which is just another weird out-of-pocket thing in this movie.
Yeah. But anyway, so basically, what the Spirit of the West says to Rango here is that like every man has his own journey, right? And he basically is like, you got to get back on your path to your destiny, is kind of the vibe of the whole thing.
No man can walk out on his own story.
Yes. Yeah. Is the exact line.
Yes, that's the line.
And then he drives off into the desert in his golf cart to presumably keep metal detecting. And it's so weird. And then Roadkill shows back up, Alfred Molina's character.
Yeah, the artifice that he's kind of in the spiritual plane sort of fades away and reveals that he is in this dry lake bed on the other side of the road.
Yeah.
And Roadkill says, "You've made it to the other side," which is the other side of the road.
Yes. And he basically, there's a line here about how the lake bed used to be full of water. Where did the water go? And then they go, Roadkill and Rango travel across the desert together. They find some of the walking cactuses who are leaning all one specific direction. And Rango has kind of a moment where he has a realization. He's like, they follow the water. And then the cactuses uproot themselves and walk across the desert. And Alfred Molina Armadillo and Johnny Depp Chameleon just follow the walking cactuses across the desert to a shutoff valve, right? To this shutoff valve on the pipe. And it's overlooking something. And Rango has another realization about where the water went. And it's Las fucking Vegas.
It's Las Vegas with a golf course in view and sprinklers.
Yes. And there is a real conservationist bent to this moment in the movie.
Yeah.
And that is why basically everything from Rango reaching the road and then him crossing the road, everything from there to this moment is my favorite part of this movie, because it's like weird vision quest, CGI Clint Eastwood voiced by Timothy Oliphant, right? And then pilgrimage across the desert, walking cactuses, and it ends, the moment ends with, and this is kind of the emotional peak of the film, not the plot peak, right? But this is the emotional peak of the film, and it basically is just Rango realizing that the reason that there is all of this suffering in the town of Dirt is because the resources have been diverted to fucking Las Vegas golf courses. It's like so fun and subversive and like has such a strong environmental message to it. And I wasn't expecting that in this movie. And I was like, oh, this rocks.
Yeah.
It's my favorite thing that happens in the movie.
Yeah,
it's so good.
It's such a cool thing to throw in here at the end. And Rango has this flashbacks of all the times the mayor's talked about water. The cactus have gathered around this shutoff valve, and he sees more boot prints kind of in the mud, and Rango decides to go back to Dirt. First, he shows up at the moles' hideout and seems to kind of cut a deal with them. And we don't know what it is yet. There's this amazing shot of a sandstorm, and we can see Rango in the distance, kind of in a silhouette in the sandstorm, walking towards the camera through this cemetery, and as the wind blows some sand off of the ground, and we reveal Rango's sheriff badge.
Yes.
And he picks it up.
This was a shot that I also wanted to call out, because it looks way better than it needed to, right?
Yeah.
It's just a moment of like real like, oh, like the people who made this really cared about it.
This may have been another one of my good movie moments, because it goes so incredibly hard.
Yeah, it rocks.
Back in town, the mayor is trying to pressure Beans into selling her ranch.
Mm-hmm.
Rattlesnake Jake is there intimidating her. Jake grabs her, like wraps her up in his body, and threatens to squeeze her until her eyeballs pop out.
Yes, and I believe she at some point says, "Go to hell" to him. And this is where he says, "Where do you think I came from?" Which I was like, this is so, again, is just so hard for a kid's movie. Like, it's like having one of your characters be like, "I emerged from the bowels of hell." It's like, are kids like hiding behind their fingers at this portion of the film? Like, if you're a 6-year-old in the theater watching Rango, can you handle this? I don't know if you can. It's pretty intense.
We don't scare kids anymore.
Yeah,
we're too afraid to scare children.
Children should be afraid of movies. They should be afraid of hell. They should be afraid of My House at Halloween. Anyway.
They should be afraid of Rattlesnake Jake.
Yes.
I'm afraid of him. I also want to fuck him, but I am afraid of him.
Let's move on.
Yeah.
No more talking about fucking snake.
Rango calls him out, and I think he literally says, "Jake, I'm calling you out."
Yep.
They come downstairs from the mayor's office to the street, and they all gather around. Rango has literally one bullet in his gun. He checks the cylinder. This is another huge Sergio Leone reference. Just all of the shots here framing this duel are so good. There's this, again, very awesome, really just raw as hell shot of Rango walking down the street, kind of framed by these nooses that are just hanging somewhere. While this is happening, Roadkill is at the water shutoff valve with the cactus. Somehow he tells these cactus to activate the water valve.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, the moles are down under the ground and they break the water pipe.
Mm-hmm.
Wounded Bird in town climbs up to the clock tower to get a shot off at Jake.
Yeah.
To distract him, and Jake shoots him and he falls. I think he survives.
He survives. He has a line.
He does
after
survive.
He has a line after he gets shot where he was like, "That was a bad idea."
Yeah. The water starts rushing through the caves underground, and it bursts up and sends Jake flying through the air.
And this is the second moment, the second scene in this movie where Rango saves the town by just absolutely destroying it, because water starts shooting up from everywhere, it's from the ground, like all over the town of Dirt, and it's just like blowing up buildings and like knocking stuff over. And I'm like, again, he's the town's hero, but he is causing just like untold damage. Like there's not going to be a town left for him to be the sheriff of.
Yeah.
But it's this great moment where, all the water shows back up.
Yeah. Jake lands and he sees the shadow of the hawk. But he realizes that it's a bat, and it's actually tons of bats from the moles. This is the deal that Rango cut with them. And Jake starts wildly firing his Gatling gun off.
One minor complaint about this, that moment specifically, feels wholesale stolen from A Bug's Life. Because in A Bug's Life, Hopper, the mean grasshopper, is scared of a bird. And at the end of the movie, the ants make a fake bird to scare him, and then he realizes it's fake. Almost beat for beat the exact same thing that happens here, where it's like snake afraid of bird, fake bird, realizes it's fake. You know, it's just a minor complaint. I was like, this is almost exactly the same thing. But anyway,
Rango pulls his gun out.
Yeah,
he's right up in Jake's face, and he says, "It only takes one bullet." And Jake says, "You ain't got the nerve." And Rango says, "Try me."
Yep.
And is looking at him totally steely-eyed. And
there's a moment of mutual respect between gunslingers, unspoken, that happens here.
And I love it.
It rocks. Yeah.
The mayor has Beans hostage at this point, and Rango notices Rango and Beans get locked up in the water jug that's in the bank, and it's starting to fill with water.
Yes.
And the mayor double crosses Jake.
Yeah.
The mayor threatens to kill Jake because there's no room for gunslingers in this new West anymore.
Yeah.
Rango has the one bullet still in his mouth. He and Beans kiss.
And she swallows
the bullet,
which is very, very funny. And then she, upon learning that she accidentally swallowed their best chance of escape, does the thing where she freezes again and starts sinking under the water, and he has to give her the underwater Heimlich. Which then causes her to spit the bullet out, and it very slowly floats through the water and just hits the glass of the tank that they're enclosed in. And it is very, very cartoony, but this moment worked for me so well, where the bullet is just barely floating toward the glass, and it just goes tink, and then a spider web of cracks immediately bursts from the place where the bullet just barely hit the glass, and the whole thing explodes. It's a very funny cartoon gag.
Yeah, it floods the bank, and the bank explodes.
And the turtle mayor is knocked onto his shell, so he's belly up in the street basically.
And Rango basically gives the mayor over to Jake.
Yeah, and the mayor immediately starts doing the thing that this type of villain, this type of double-crossing fat cat villain does, which is as soon as he's in a vulnerable position, he's like, "We can make a deal. I'll cut you in on the profits." Right? He just starts immediately trying to bargain. Yeah, and Rango is like, "None of that."
And Jake has probably my favorite line of the movie that does not involve a human spinal column being found in fecal matter. Where, because of the mutual respect between gunslingers thing, Jake says, "I tip my hat to you, one legend to another."
Yes.
And
also very funny because he's a snake and he doesn't have hands, so he literally cannot tip his hat.
He literally can't. Maybe he does it with the end of his tail. I'm not sure.
I don't think he does. I think he kind of just like nods his head a little bit. Yeah.
And then Jake drags the mayor away screaming, presumably because Jake's about to kill the mayor.
Yes.
Which goes really hard.
Yes. It's a great way for this villain to meet his demise, like the mayor, and it's also just a great moment for Jake, Rattlesnake Jake, who we love, and David wants to fuck.
Fuck him. Priscilla runs up to him and runs up to Rango and hugs him and says, "You brought the water back like you promised. You are a hero," and it's really sweet.
Yeah,
it's a really sweet moment. Everyone starts having a party in the water. The town's destroyed, but by gum, they have water.
Yep.
The mariachi band kicks up again, and it says, "Surely he'll die, but he'll die someday, maybe of old age."
It is very funny that the whole movie, the mariachi owls have basically been like, "This guy's gonna die," and you assume it's gonna happen in the movie, and then at the end of the movie, they're like, "Well, he still will die someday, as we all will." Right? Which again is just a very funny approach to take in a kid's movie. To basically end it on being like, "And death will come for us all. Good night, kids."
Yep. But the people of the town will always remember the name of the one who saved them. Rango.
Yes, and then there's a really, really fun kind of rock and roll mariachi outro version of the Rango theme.
For the credits.
Over really fun animated credits. And that's Rango.
That's Rango. Justus, I've had so much fun talking about this movie with you.
Yeah, I have as well, David.
But I want to know.
Yes.
Is this the greatest movie ever made?
David, is Rango the greatest movie ever made? I don't watch a lot of family films. I don't watch a lot of animated films. I generally just don't care for this type of movie. Because it's just not what speaks to me, right? I'm a big horror guy. I love evil films. I love action films. I love science fiction. Family films pretty low on the list of priorities for me. Also, I am not particularly well versed in westerns, and I think that there were probably a lot of references in this movie and nods and stuff like that went over my head. Because I don't know the source material that it is pulling from particularly well. I think there were two things in this movie that worked phenomenally well for me. One was anytime we were doing balls to the wall, Looney Tunes, cartoon action sequences. Those in this movie, we didn't describe them in a lot of detail because they're very hard to describe. You kind of have to just watch them. But those are always very fun in this movie. There's just joke after joke, visual gag after visual gag. And they are exhilarating, and Gore Verbinski is a good action director. His action direction translates very well to animation, and I thought all of the animated antics worked very well for me in this movie. The other thing that works even better is when this movie gets surreal and weird, and we've already talked about that enough, so I'm not going to harp on it, but that all rocks. Anytime this movie's doing something kind of out there, that's when it really locks me in. The issue that I have with this movie is the moments that are between those things. When the movie kind of slows down and takes a little bit more time with the plot stuff, which I think is pretty simplistic and tropey and trite. And I know that is an intentional thing because of the source materials that it is referencing. But again, I'm not very well versed in those source materials. So for me, I was just like maybe missing some of the more nuanced nods and just being like, okay, yeah, I get it. He has to go form a posse and find where the water went or whatever, right? So I've already also talked about how some of the mammal character design, I just couldn't tell what the hell I was looking at. I could tell that it was well animated, but I just didn't know what the characters were, which was occasionally distracting to me. I think the voice cast was great. Loved the movie. Loved the movie.
Choose your next words carefully.
I loved the movie Rango from 2011. I thought it was a fantastic time, a very fun movie. I would recommend people who haven't seen it give it a watch. For me, it's not the greatest movie ever made.
Justus!
I'm sorry, David. I had to speak my truth.
Imagine little Abigail Breslin Mouse is in front of you and you have to tell her that her movie's not the greatest movie ever made.
That character landed for you better than it did for me. I was like, okay, yeah, it's a cute kid or whatever. But like, I don't know.
She's a cute kid that occasionally says like unhinged things,
right,
which is
yeah.
great.
She does say some dark things. Like when Rango like leaves for the posse, he basically is like, "You're my deputy, you're in charge." And she's like, "Do I get to shoot anybody?"
Yeah.
And yeah, that's a fun and cute moment. But yeah, just not the greatest movie ever made for me. And I'm sorry to have to say that to you. Now I think you can imagine how I was feeling a little bit during Prince of Darkness, which is I've been very nice to this movie. I've been very complimentary. I enjoyed it a lot. It's just not the greatest movie ever made.
I'm gonna fucking kill you. I'm gonna give you to Rattlesnake Jake after I fuck him.
David, is Rango the greatest movie ever made?
Like you, I do not watch a ton of family films, family animated films. I did when I was a little bit younger, and this is kind of where I first came across this movie. But just generally not for me. It takes a lot for something to really stand out and impress me and interest me. And wall to wall, Rango kicks way more ass than it has any right to. It is beautifully shot. It is gorgeously rendered by ILM combined with Roger Deakins. This movie will look incredible 10 years from now, and other movies of this era will not. The voice cast is great. Johnny Depp is great. I didn't really get into it. I think there are points where maybe he goes a tad too far, but he's still in that Goldilocks zone where I like the Johnny Depp performance. I think the script is fantastic. There are so many great lines and jokes and mature moments. I love the crazy, zany Looney Tunes action sequences. I love all of these side characters in the background. We didn't even get to talk about all of them. There's this horned toad that always has like really excited interjections. There's a bird that is basically like a war veteran. He's in like a Civil War outfit that has an arrow through his eye that he doesn't know is there. And that's a joke, and he's kind of losing his mind.
It is very funny.
It's so fun, and it's pushing 2 hours, and yet I didn't feel the length. Kind of has a bit of a villain problem similar to Ip Man, where we have a lot of different villains in the mix, and not always sure which ones we really want to invest in.
Right. The bird, the snake, the turtle.
Right. But
Bat Bill.
Not as much of an issue for me here. I watched this 2 months ago and had a great time with it, but found I had some issues with it. Watched it last night for this record, and despite all that, I think I have to say that Rango is the greatest movie ever made. One of my favorite movies that we've covered on this podcast so far. It hits for me so well. I love Westerns. This is a movie that loves Westerns. I don't think you need to know Westerns to appreciate this movie. I don't think the references are ever over the top to the point where someone who hasn't seen a Western won't appreciate it, outside of the Clint Eastwood joke at the end. The Clint Eastwood being the spirit of the West.
And even I got that, even though I'm not particularly well versed in the genre.
Sure. It is such a bold, creative, exciting, thrilling animated movie that I'm just so glad it exists. You know, they never made a sequel. They never made a TV show. They had like a video game, and that's it. Just a kick-ass movie that if you haven't seen it, please go watch it. I can't say enough good things about this movie. So yeah, greatest movie ever made. Fuck you, Justus. The pod dogs are barking, which is signaling we should probably wind this show down.
Yeah, we should probably get out of here.
Thanks for joining us, Justus. It was an honor and a privilege as always to sit here and talk to you. Next week, we're going to your pick.
Yes.
Do you want to introduce it?
We are taking just you usually introduce the movie, but I'll do it this time. We're taking a full pivot, like a complete 180 from the family-friendly podcast that you just listened to about Rango. We are going to be talking about a Paul Thomas Anderson film. Paul Thomas Anderson, yes. I just wanted to make sure because sometimes I get Paul Thomas Anderson and Paul W.S. Anderson mixed up because they're both Paul Andersons, but they're very different directors.
Very different.
The Paul Thomas Anderson film, Boogie Nights, from 1997. So we were dealing with one type of snake in this movie. We're going to be dealing with a whole different type of snake next week. We're going to be talking about Mark Wahlberg's prosthetic hog.
We're going to be talking about Mark and his Wahlberg.
Yes. A movie that is extremely long, and as you know, our episodes tend to not be short exactly. So I think we're probably going to have to record a 12-hour podcast on Boogie Nights, just given the runtime of this film. 1 hour for every inch of Mark Wahlberg's penis.
We got sad William H. Macy in that.
God.
We have
John C. Reilly in maybe the only performance of his that I've ever enjoyed.
We got sad Philip Seymour Hoffman.
I'm a fucking idiot.
I've seen this movie once.
Yeah.
And we got a surprise Alfred Molina as well. Got a surprise Alfred Molina.
Yes, this is
got
what
a
will
doozy.
Yes, a doozy of a Molina appearance. Yes, this is what is going to make our first 12 episodes 25% Molina.
Yeah. I've seen this movie before along with a couple other Paul Thomas Anderson movies, and he's a director that I think I need to rewatch most of his movies to get an appreciation for them, because I do like this movie. But it's been a while since I've seen it, and I'm looking forward to diving back into the seedy underbelly of the porn industry in Hollywood in the 70s as brought to life by Paul Thomas Anderson and Mark Wahlberg's massive hog. So we hope that you will join us for that very family unfriendly episode of the greatest movie ever made. And until then, we will leave you with our usual sign off and well wishes to you.
I'm gonna do it in the Ray Winstone voice.
Oh, okay. I'll do it in a cowboy voice. Lighter, dipshits.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of The Greatest Movie Ever Made. Please remember to leave us a rating and a review, and to subscribe to the show wherever you listen. We appreciate you supporting the show and spreading the word. Tell your friends to listen, tell your enemies to listen, tell your mom to listen. If your neighbor has an unsecured Bluetooth speaker, connect to it and play an episode. You can follow us on social media at TGMEM_podcast, and if you've got a movie that you want us to talk about, send us an email at thegreatestmoviepodcast@gmail.com.